Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going through my Game Week 24 complete wildcard guide. Yes, that's right, if you are on your wildcard, this video should hopefully be very helpful. Even if you're not on your wildcard though, the entirety of the video should be helpful. We're going to go through budget enablers, players you should target, we're going through chip strategy, doubles, players with fixtures to be rearranged, whatever it may be over the next sort of 5 to 10 game weeks. It is really covered in this video, so hopefully it's helpful for everyone, regardless of whether you're playing the wildcard or not this week. I'm actually recording this intro after I've recorded the rest of the video and edited the rest of the video, because just before I was about to upload this, we've had the double Game Week 25 announced, and Manchester United and Brighton, as Rangnick hinted to a couple of weeks ago, has been added into Game Week 25. At the time of recording, that is the only one which has been added, which means that the only 2 teams to double in 25 are going to be Manchester United and Brighton. That doesn't change the rest of the video, so I'm not going to re-record it. And I did highlight that that would probably be added into Game Week 25. So all this might do is on your wildcard, you might just want to include 1 extra Brighton or 1 extra Manchester United player. It might make you lean towards De Gea or Sanchez in goal. It might make you lean to like a Fernandes instead of De Bruyne, or potentially like a Dallo and Cucurella in defence. But I don't think generally this should change your approach, because you're not just wildcarding for the next few. And Manchester United have got pretty good fixtures anyway, so you might have wanted to include them. And Brighton have got decent fixtures anyway, so you might have had some of these players in your wildcard draft anyway. You might just want to include a couple more. But just so you know, in the video, if I mentioned that there might be a double in 25, it was recorded just before, but hopefully it is still incredibly useful. It should remain the same regardless of any other future announcements as well. Without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, before we jump into today's video, I just wanted to give a massive shout out to Ultimate Champions, who will be the new sponsor of some videos on this channel for the foreseeable future. Ultimate Champions is the first free-to-earn fantasy football game powered by the blockchain. What I'd like you to do is imagine a cross between fantasy football, FIFA, and trading cards, and you arrive with Ultimate Champions. You collect your favorite players as NFTs or non-fungible tokens, basically like rare cards as you would see in FIFA. You create your team and you score points to earn rewards. The better your team does in real life, as with fantasy football, the bigger the rewards you can earn, and that can be financial as well. At the moment, the beta will include the Championship, League One, and Scottish teams as well, but after the beta, there are plans in place to include further leagues and further teams as well, so this will continue to grow over the months and years. I'll be honest, guys, this is genuinely a project I'm very, very excited by, and a game I will be playing personally. It combines my favorite thing about FIFA with pack openings, my favorite thing about trading cards, in that you can own rare cards that you can show off to your friends, family, colleagues, and both of those are put in the context of fantasy football with the chance to earn some serious money as well. The beta isn't quite live yet, so if you do want to know when the game is launched, what I'll do is I'll leave 2 links in the description. I'll leave one, a link to the Discord community, which you're going to want to join for updates, and also some potential opportunities to earn some packs before the game. So when you do log on and you make your account when the beta goes live, you'll get some free packs. So definitely go into the Discord community. I'm in there myself. And other than that, I'll also leave a link to their social medias, such as their Twitter channel, just so that you can follow them on the socials and you can know again when there are any updates around the app launching. This is definitely a project you want to get on sooner rather than later, so definitely click the links in the description. Let me know if you're excited. I'm very excited by this project and we'll be covering it in future videos as well. Thanks, guys. So I've deliberately made this video with 2 things in mind. The first thing in mind is I want this to be useful whether you're on your wildcard or not. So as I said at the start, carry on watching. It should be useful throughout, even if you're not playing your wildcard this week. And the second thing I wanted to make sure of is that even if doubles, triples, blanks, whatever it may be, are announced after I record and release this video, it is still useful and that the information wouldn't change that much. So in and around some specific game week advice, etc., there is also some general advice, chip strategy advice, and also drafts, taking into account potential doubles being announced after I record this video. So hopefully, regardless of what happens, this should be a useful video over the next couple of weeks for you guys. So what I thought I'd start with is just some general wildcard advice. Now, I've covered this a few times on my channel, and this list definitely isn't exhaustive, but these are just a few things that if you're playing your wildcard this week or in the next few weeks at some point, I would be considering these. So the first thing is, with everything going on at the moment, I personally would have 15 playing players. Now, by that, I don't literally just mean they have to be playing. What I mean is 15 players that you wouldn't mind relying on if you needed to. Now, of course, your 15th player or your 14th player, often your 5th defender, doesn't need to be incredible. I'm not talking about a £5 or £6 million defender as your 15th player, but it needs to be someone that if, for example, you do have blank game weeks or potentially there are more postponements, that you wouldn't mind that defender filling in. Because I've made the mistake before of loading up my bench really cheap with players that play 90 minutes. And I'm like, well, at least I know they play. But you just end up always taking hits because you never want them to play. For example, earlier on in this season, I had like Gilmore and Brownhill. Yes, they play, And yes, you can rely on them to probably get a 2-pointer. But when it comes to it and you realize you're going to need them, all you'll end up doing is taking a hit to remove another player because you don't want to rely on those players. So there are cheap players that you can rely on. We're going to discuss it later. The likes of Broya, potentially Ramsey as well. You can go cheap, but also with those cheap players, you don't mind playing them as such. So in my opinion, any draft you do should have 15 playing players. Not all of them need to be expensive, but they need to be players that you don't mind relying on. What I would say is this is even more so the case if you haven't already played your bench boost. So if you haven't already played your bench boost, I would definitely load up your bench now because you're not going to get a second wildcard. So if by the time you want to play your bench boost, you have to then make transfers to start strengthening your bench, it becomes a real issue. And this also comes down to the fact that I would definitely have 2 playing goalkeepers, specifically if you haven't played your bench boost as well. If you've already played your bench boost, you could probably get away with 1 playing goalkeeper, such as a Sarah, Ramsdale, whoever it may be, and then just have a second keeper on the bench that maybe plays, such as a Foster or a Dubravka, but isn't that expensive. So that's completely your choice. But for me, I would have 15 playing players, including 2 goalkeepers, especially if you've still got the bench boost to play. The second tip is just be aware of upcoming doubles and blanks. Whether you do the research yourself, whether you rely on the likes of Ben Crellin or just watching YouTube videos such as these, just be aware of what is coming up. Because yes, it's very difficult to plan long term at the moment, but you can just be aware of the likely blanks and doubles. So we're going to cover this in one of the next couple of sections, but game week 27, looks like, well, there will be a blank in game week 27, potentially about 4 to 6 teams. Definitely going to be a big blank in game week 30 as well. And then we've probably got 2 huge doubles in game week 33 and game week 36. So they're the main ones to keep an eye on. But outside of that, we could potentially have another 6, 7, 8 double game weeks outside of those as well. So just keep an eye on the fixtures, keep an eye on the games to be rearranged, and just be ready to react. You don't even necessarily need to plan too much. Just know that they're coming is probably the best way to approach it at the moment. Tip 3 is in and around that to have some long-term glue, guys. And again, I've stolen this phrase off of Prenil or Late Riser if you follow the FPL Wire. What this means is that, yes, you want to focus your transfers on a few key areas and you want to be able to attack the upside by changing out your specifically your midfielders and your attackers, but you also want some players that you don't mind keeping long-term. So the person that I always come back to for this is someone like a Rafinha. Rafinha, yes, he doesn't get that many double-digit hauls, and yes, you're not probably going to captain him too often, but regardless of fixtures, he's probably on penalty still. He's on a lot of set pieces. He's the talisman for Leeds. He's going to play 90 minutes most games, so you could pretty much keep him for the remainder of the season. Try and have a few players in your team that you don't need to change too often. I know the likes of Cancelo and Trent are obvious ones, but if you can fill out 8 or 9 spots that you don't need to change, you can always focus in and hone in your transfers on only a few spots, and that makes your decision-making process a lot easier. Tip 4 is to look at which teams have lots of fixtures to be rearranged. And number 1, consider players from these teams if you're making transfers. But number 2, probably don't take those players out of your team. For example, if you have like a Cornet in your team, you probably wouldn't because he's gone to AFCON. But with Burnley having 4 fixtures to rearrange, you probably wouldn't want to take him out of your team. Equally, Everton, despite not looking great recently, they've got 3 really good fixtures to be rearranged, plus some good fixtures coming up as well. So that has put me off of taking out Damari Gray and Calvert-Lewin, because at some point in the near future, they're going to have at least one of those fixtures rearranged. And across the next, for 15 game weeks, they've got to have at least 3 fixtures put in somewhere. So that at least helps me, again, prioritise my transfers, because I wouldn't prioritise taking out a player that's not only got decent fixtures, but also has at least 3 or 4 fixtures to be rearranged as well. Maddison's another good example of that. We will take a look at teams with fixtures to be rearranged in the next section. And then tip number 5 is rotations are king. And I'm not talking about Josh King here. I'm talking about rotations are, in my opinion, the optimal way to plan your team. So in and around this, what I essentially mean is you'll probably have a strong base of 9 to 10 players that you play most weeks. And then it will normally be that 10th and 11th spot that you rotate amongst some of your cheaper players. Most people don't rotate like 5 or 6 players at once. It's normally like 2 or 3 spots you rotate, and that player will be first bench one week, and then there'll be your 11th player one week, and you're sort of rotating those last few spots. Just plan ahead and make sure that those rotations work. It's so easy to do. Just look at which weeks the player that you want to play. So, for example, if you have Josh King and some weeks you want to rotate him, look at which weeks you don't want to play Josh King and make sure that the player you would rotate him with, whether it be like an 8 Nuri or potentially like a Veltman, make sure that the weeks that you wouldn't want to play King, that defender has a decent fixture. And in doing so, you can field a pretty optimal 11 most weeks. So just plan ahead in that sense. Yes, you can't plan ahead for doubles because we don't always know when they'll be, but you can at least plan ahead with the fixtures we have and try and make sure that you have that optimal rotation each week. So those are just 5 tips to start this video that will generally apply across the entire season. Obviously, the later you play the wildcard, the more information you will have, and that's why I'm personally holding the wildcard. But if you're playing early, i.e. Game Week 24, that is quite an early wildcard, you do need to consider these things and think about how you will maneuver the rest of the season. So let me know if you have any other tips below for general wildcard advice, but those would be my top 5. Let's move on to the next section. So leading on from that first section, here are the teams with 3+ fixtures to be rearranged, and also the teams with 2 fixtures to be rearranged listed at the bottom as well. As I said, I probably wouldn't necessarily focus on bringing all these players in or including 5 from these teams on my wildcard or anything crazy like that. But I would keep this in the back of my mind. And if I had a 50-50 decision, just as a random example, between someone like maybe like Cornet and then Gallagher, and it genuinely was a 50-50 decision in my mind, I would look at this and think, well, Burnley have 4 fixtures to be rearranged. Palace have, I think it's 1 fixture to be rearranged. In the back of my mind, I would be thinking, if it is genuinely a 50-50, maybe pick the player with 3 more fixtures at some point, but I wouldn't necessarily prioritise Cornet over Gallagher, for example, if you think Gallagher's the better pick. So hopefully that's clear. Also, what I would be thinking is if I own a player from Burnley, Arsenal, Leicester, Spurs or Everton, potentially don't bother taking them out for a player with less fixtures to be rearranged. That would just be my opinion. What I would say, however, is that there are going to be big double game weeks in game week 33, game week 36, and then potentially 35 and 37 as well. So it could be that some of these teams' games aren't rescheduled until way later in the season, and you don't just want to bring players in for therefore, or just keep players based on the fixtures to be rescheduled. So I guess this is one of those things you should keep in the back of your mind. But just to reiterate, Burnley, Arsenal, and Leicester have 4 fixtures to be rearranged each. I would say that out of those teams, I like Leicester's fixtures the most. Norwich at home, Everton away, Burnley away as well. Chelsea away is not a great fixture. But if I did own a Maddison, for example, I'd probably hold on to him. He's got pretty good underlying statistics over the recent game weeks. Pretty good fixtures to be rearranged. Leicester do look like they're improving. So that's a player that I might end up keeping. And same with Spurs and Everton. I quite like Spurs and Everton's fixtures to be rearranged as well. And they both have 3. So I guess I would just keep an eye on it. I wouldn't necessarily remove players with fixtures to be rearranged. But like I said, I wouldn't let it completely overrule your decision making, because we just don't know when those fixtures might be rearranged. Let me know down below, out of Burnley, Arsenal, Leicester, Spurs and Everton, how many of those players do you own? I pretty much currently own Ramsdale from Arsenal, and then outside of that, I've just got 2 Everton players. So it might be that if we do get some doubles for Burnley and Leicester and Spurs, I might be scrambling to get those players in future game weeks. So, thanks to the wonderful Ben Krellin once again for providing us with this incredible information, these incredible, I would say guesses, but it's more like an educated guess or an educated estimate, you would say, based on when the fixtures will be rearranged. So without him, I'm not sure what the community would do. He's absolutely fantastic. So you can see the source is Ben Krellin over on Twitter, Crellin. Definitely go follow him. He's an absolute guru for double game week and blank game weeks rescheduling and predicting when the fixtures will go. Basically, it could be absolute chaos over the next 15 game weeks. It looks like we could almost be getting a blank or double every single week, bar a couple, which it doesn't look very likely we'll get some. So currently, at the time of recording, double game week 25 has not been announced, but I think there's too much smoke without fire. And I just think that based on all of the rumors we've seen, based on the stuff that I've seen in the news, it looks like Game Week 25 will be a double, and it does look like we'll get that announcement before double Game Week 24 deadline, which is absolutely fantastic. Ben's also said that we might get some news for double Game Week 26 before the Game Week 24 deadline. If that is the case, obviously wildcard drafts might change completely, but just keep an eye out. It looks like we're going to get doubles in 25 and 26. Outside of that, you can see that the ones that are pretty much dead cert, specifically Game Week 27, are big blanks or fairly big blanks in Game Week 27 and Game Week 30 as well. Now, Game Week 27 at the moment looks like a fairly small blank. At the time of recording, it is Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool and Leicester that are currently blanking, those 4 teams. We could potentially get more in there as well. But that is pretty big because most of us are going to own triple Liverpool, potentially an Arsenal player. And then outside of that, like I said, maybe a Maddison, maybe you hold on to Reece James, or potentially you've got any other Chelsea, maybe a Rudiger in your team that you hold on to. So a lot of us might be left without 5 or 6 players there. So Game Week 27 being a big blank is, or fairly important blank, I should say, rather than being a big blank, is something to keep your eye on. Game Week 30 looks like it'll be a massive blank due to the FA Cup, so that's another one to keep your eye on. Outside of that, there are lots of potential double game weeks. I mean, tons. As you can see, a double game week 25, 26, 29. Then Ben has said we might have one in 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37. Of course, some of these might only be one team. As we saw in Game Week 23, we could just have 1 or 2 teams, 1 game added into that game week to make it a double. So some of these might not be worth worrying about too much and just be reacting in that week and using your transfer to bring in those players. But the ones that look like they're going to be really big double game weeks are Game Week 33, and game week 36 as well. Now, we can't predict how many teams this will be. It'll be largely depending on rescheduling, domestic competitions, etc. Also European competitions. But generally speaking, this is what the structure kind of looks like. And therefore, my current plan, if possible, based on chip strategy, we're not going to talk about chips too much here, but I think you've got two different ways to approach this. If we get the fixtures, the doubles for 25 and 26 before the game week 24 deadline, I think you can go for the early wildcard strategy and you can attack 25 to 29 and then maybe free hit in game week 30. So you really target the next sort of 5 or 6 games with your wildcard, free hit in 30. And then if you've got a second free hit, you use that in one of the future double game weeks, maybe double game week 33 or double game week 36. So you can attack sort of the next set of 4 blanks and doubles. Or what you can do is try your best to maneuver game week 24 to game week 30, maybe dead end into blank game week 30, and then maybe play your wildcard in game week 31 or game week 32. What you're doing there is you're doing your best to maneuver the double game weeks that we've got coming up now, and then you can basically attack those final 7 or 8 game weeks. So what you do is you'd be wildcarding into 5 double game weeks. You might also have a bench boost and triple captains playing around there as well. So that's my preference, that I think we're going to get a lot of doubles in the back end of the season, the last sort of 7 or 8 game weeks. So I'm going to try my best to maneuver 25 to 30 with free transfers and a few hits. Maybe using... I'd try only use 1 free hit, but I might end up using both free hits, and then I'll save my wildcard, bench boost, and triple captaincy for those final 5 or 6 games. So let me know down below what you're currently planning, but I just thought I'd draw your attention to the fact that we're going to have a lot of blanks and doubles. So don't just splash both free hits now. Don't stress that you have to play your wildcard for game week 25 double, because we could potentially get 8, 9, 10 double game weeks after that. So it's pretty crazy, but all we can do for now is just keep our ear open for different news, I guess. So I just wanted to quickly draw your attention to an incredible resource created by Mikhail Tokvam. Sorry if I've absolutely butchered your name there. The only reason that I saw this was it was drawn to my attention by the FPL Wire and FPL Black Box. So if as Mark, Zoph, Pranil, or Big Man are watching, absolutely love your shows. Absolutely excellent content. If you don't watch the FPL Wire and FPL Black Box, what are you doing? Absolutely check them out on YouTube and all the podcast platforms as well. But it's brilliant, this resource, because what it looks at is, number one, how many fixtures have they got to be rearranged for each different team, and also the probability of that fixture being rearranged into any specific game week. So it's worked out based on probabilities, how many fixtures they've got to be rearranged, what their fixture schedule looks like. So what you can essentially see is the game weeks where it is most likely that a lot of fixtures will be rearranged, and also the game weeks where it's likely that there'll be blank game weeks. So as you can see just by glancing, the numbers will probably be too small if you're on your phone, but you can see game week 30 is one in which the probability is very high that a lot of these teams will blank, whereas the fixtures, the game weeks where it looks like quite a few fixtures might be rearranged, as I've alluded to in the previous section, game week 33 and game week 36. But you can see game week 37 has quite high probability as well, and then 30 and 34 and 35 in and around that as well. 28 and 29 also have some pretty good probabilities for some of the teams. So what I would like to do is just head over to Mikhail Tokvam's Twitter. You can see the handle down below in the bottom left. Head over and you can look at this in your own time. But it is worth noting that there is some ability to predict the future. Now, we don't know what the Premier League are going to do. Sometimes we get it horribly wrong. But with this probability sheet, with Ben Crellin's predictions and regular tweets as well, we can do a lot of long-term planning, despite the fact that this season is trying its very best to ruin the planning element of the game. So definitely go over to the Twitter. I just wanted to draw your attention to this resource, because I'm definitely going to be using it for future weeks. And I think he is adjusting it. With every announcement we get, he'll adjust and then tweet a new version of it as well. So thank you, Mikhail, for providing this absolutely brilliant free probability sheet. Really, really do appreciate it. Go check it out in your own time. Right, we're getting into the meaty section of the video now, where we start talking about specific players to target. As I said, this is especially helpful if you're on your wild card, but even if not, these are just players you should target and players you should consider anyway. Specifically, if you are on your wild card, as I said, I would have 15 playing players. And in doing that, that does mean that you will need 2 playing goalkeepers. Now, the reason for that is if you're going to bench boost at some point in the future, i.e. you haven't already used your bench boost, you're going to want 2 keepers, so that when you do bench boost, you are getting the full amount of points you possibly can from your bench. Because the issue you face if you don't have a playing keeper is you bench boost for 4 players, i.e. your entire bench. If you don't have a keeper, you're reducing your potential for points by about 25%, which just doesn't seem optimal to play the chip for me. And I don't think it's normally useful to waste 4 points or to waste a free transfer later on down the line, bringing in another goalkeeper. So for me, I would just wildcard with 2 keepers. And if you're going to wildcard with 2 keepers in game week 24, it probably probably means that the best optimal strategy will be to rotate those keepers from Game Week 24 to Game Week 38. Now, of course, the issue you face with that is it's very difficult to know which keeper to select, because often those like mega hauls will be a random like Ramsdale versus Man City, where you just can't predict it happening. So you do have to accept that if you're rotating keepers, you will leave points on your bench, and sometimes you'll pick the wrong goalkeeper. So if that isn't something that you feel like you can deal with, if benching points really, really upsets you, maybe don't rotate your keepers. But if you can get it correct, if you can rotate your keepers correctly, you can increase your points by a ridiculous percentage. So what I thought I'd do is just draw your attention to the fact that you should consider this. I think if you're picking 2 playing keepers, try and look at which keepers rotate well. So what I've done is I've just selected 2, I was going to say random, but 2 of the optimal rotating pairs that I've looked at, and I've also listed 5 other pairs down below, or 5 pairs that you might want to consider. The only other issue with this is that it can be a lot of money. So I would argue that maybe just looking at points, the optimal rotation, or 2 keepers that I really like, are Pope and Sarr rotating. But of course, Pope's 5.4 million and Sarr is 5.2 million. So you are spending like 10.6 million on your 2 keepers. So I would only do this if you're not planning on getting like a couple of premiums into your team and you don't need to use the money elsewhere. The reason I like Pope and Sarr is for basically 2 reasons. Number one, I like Sarr because Wolves are arguably in the top 4 for defensive data across the season, and therefore I think that Wolves are probably a team that you might want to include on your wildcard, specifically a defender from that team. And the reason I like Pope in there is because they've got 4 extra fixtures to be rearranged, which means they'll probably get at least 4 double game weeks. Potentially, they could get a triple game week at some point. So what I would essentially do if I was to pick a rotating pair of Sarr and Pope is I'd pretty much start Sarr almost every game, and I would just rotate Pope in when Sarr's got a very difficult fixture, or when Pope has a double game week or potentially a triple game week as well. So as you can see with these rotating pairs, if the fixture is in blue, it means I would play the keeper in that fixture. If the fixture's in red, it means I would not play the keeper in that fixture. So for the Pope-Sarr rotation, like you can see, as you can see, I would only play Pope in probably game week 26 Brighton away, game week 33 West Ham away when Sarr's got Man City, maybe game week 36 Aston Villa at home when Sarr's got Chelsea away, and then game week 38 Newcastle at home when Sarr's got Liverpool away. So realistically, outside the doubles and triples that Pope might have, I'd probably only start him in 4 games. So you might say 5.4 million is too much to pay for that, but also when you take into account that you would then bench boost in one of these weeks, it might be worth it. So it's a bit of a tricky one to choose, to decide if that's too much money invested or whether that's a good use of your money, because you get 2 keepers for the bench boost and you get Pope for all of these potential doubles and triples, but you have a good keeper to fall back on in Sarr. A slightly cheaper rotating pair that really does rotate very, very nicely, and I can't see a single fixture there which I'm not happy playing the keeper in, is the Ramsdale and Sanchez rotation. In doing this, you're getting Ramsdale, who's one of the best keepers in the league for saves, also for XG prevented post-shot, also playing for a pretty decent defence in Arsenal, and you're also getting one of the best keepers playing for the best defences in Brighton as well. So you can rotate them in and out based on fixtures, based on double game weeks as well. We've seen that Arsenal have 4 fixtures to be rearranged as well, so you can get Ramsdale for potential double game weeks. Brighton as well look like they might have a double game week in game week 25. Again, by the time you're watching this, that might have been announced, the double game week 25 fixtures, in which case Sanchez could be a great option in game week 25. So what the rotation would look like, if I just read it out, would be Ramsdale against Wolves in 24. Then you'd have Sanchez against Watford, Burnley, Villa and Newcastle in consecutive weeks. You could also have Ramsdale in 26 against Brentford or in 28 against Watford. You've then got Leicester, Villa, Norwich, Brighton, Southampton. Southampton again, Wolves, Leeds, Newcastle, Everton. So you're basically avoiding any of the top 4 teams, potentially any of the top 6 teams by making this rotating pair. And you've also got 2 keepers from really good defences as well. So that's a potential option as well. I guess it's up to you how much money you want to spend on your keepers. You might even say that the double up of Ramsdale and Sanchez is too much. Maybe you just want to go for one of them and then just go for like a Foster or a Dubravka on the bench. I don't mind that at all. But for me, I just think if you've got your bench boost to play, and I don't think you need to use the full budget because there are some really good budget enablers in and around the team, which we're going to look at in a bit. I think you can get away with some rotating goalkeepers. Some other pairs that I've got, so you've got Pope and Sarr, you've got Ramsdale and Sanchez. Another one which is really good is Pope and Sanchez, a really nice rotating pair there, using some of the keepers we've already discussed there. Obviously, Pope and Sanchez is cheaper than Pope and Sarr, so if you do want to still go for Pope, you might be saving a bit of money going for Sanchez. You've got De Gea and Sarr is quite a nice rotation, specifically if Manchester United do get that double game week 25. Again, you might know that at the time of watching this. You might want to keep De Gea in. And then you've got an even cheaper rotating pair. De Gea and Dubravka actually mix quite nicely. They rotate quite well. You play De Gea most weeks, and in the weeks where he's got a tricky fixture, I don't mind Dubravka filling in. So there are potential options. There are so many different pairs that you could go for. You don't need an optimal keeper every week, but just make sure that you're not picking two keepers that have good fixtures in the same week and tricky fixtures in the same week as well. Because in doing so, you're not really making the most of having two playing goalkeepers. So that's my personal opinion on it. Let me know down below if you've got any rotating goalkeeper pairs that you really like. I think just about my favourite would be Ramsdale and Sanchez for value. If value wasn't a thing at all, I do really like the Pope and Sarr double up, but that is a lot of money spent on your goalkeepers. So for this next section, this is specifically for if you're wildcard and if you're trying to find funds to potentially get back to Salah or go for a double up with like Bruno, Ronaldo, Kane, KDB, whoever it may be, and you need those really cheap players. I just thought I'd cover the cheap players that I would potentially look at. Now, some of these I probably wouldn't, but I wanted to include anyway. And you always run the risk, before anyone takes my advice and then blames me for it, you always run the risk with budget enablers that they might lose their place. I don't think there's realistically anyone on here, potentially 2 or 3 that are nailed, and even those I would worry. The reason they're cheap is because they either haven't been in the team in the past, or they've just come into the club, or potentially they've been a rotation risk in the past as well. So a lot of these players, yes, they look fantastic, but you do run the risk with budget enablers that they do lose their place. And in doing so, just be willing to take that risk when you bring these players in. So as I said, the reason for this is that I think a lot of us are going to try and get 2 premiums in, which we'll discuss in the draft section, or potentially just want to spread the funds a little bit more and get a few different players in different positions. And in doing so, you might need to make a big downgrade. So what I've done is I've looked at the real budget enablers, and I'm not talking about cheap players here. So I've only got defenders under 4.3 million. I've only got midfielders under 4.6 million, and I've only got strikers from Broja and down. So I wouldn't consider King and Dennis a budget enabler. I wouldn't consider like a £5 million midfielder a budget enabler. I'm talking about the real budget enablers where you can get the most for your buck. And in my opinion, these are the players. So I've got 3 defenders listed. I think they've each got their pros, they've each got their cons. The cheapest defender that I think you can probably get is Williams of Norwich. I think that he's pretty much nailed down that left back spot. He can, of course, play at right back as well. He's got actually decent underlying statistics considering he's 3.9 million. And Norwich haven't looked terrible defensively recently. Of course, they're not great. Of course, they will concede most games. But as a 5th defender and probably a 15th player, i.e. you will probably never want to play them, it will probably be 3rd on your bench almost every week. To get 1.71 touch in the box per 90, 0.08 expected assist per 90, and 3.57 expected FPL points per 90, that's not bad for Williams. So if I was looking for a real budget enabler, a 5th defender, I think Williams would be the one for me. If you want someone from a slightly better defence, but of course £0.3 million more expensive, I do really like Veltman. And the thing I love about Veltman is that when Lamptey's not playing, he can play at right wing back. And when Lamptey is playing, he can fill in at right centre back. So Veltman is fairly versatile. The only issue with that, therefore, is I think when Lamptey's fit, he's probably first choice right wing back. And then he's got to compete with potentially a few centre backs when all of them are fit at Brighton. So I think over the immediate few game weeks, and probably for game week 25, if Brighton do get a double, I think Veltman's fairly nailed, but there is a slight risk there with minutes. I think there's probably also a slight risk with Williams, but generally speaking, I expect both of these players to be nailed. You can see with Veltman, his expected assists aren't quite as high as Williams. That's just because he plays quite a few minutes at right centre-back, as I said, when Lamptey's playing. But generally speaking, because the defence of Brighton is better, you can see his expected FPL points per 90 is better for Veltman. So I think Veltman's probably worth the extra 0.3, but if you can't get to that, I don't mind Williams. And then the 3rd defender, you can see a little star next to his name because he's probably my favourite budget enabler, is 8 Nuri. Now, he is quite a big rotation risk when Marcel's fit. I do think that 8 Nuri's first choice, but with recent fitness issues and injury issues, I'm not sure that he'll be running to the ground, and I do think he will be occasionally rotated. And obviously, if Marcel's playing well, he could just drop out completely. I don't think that will be the case, but I'm not a Wolves fan. If you are a Wolves fan, let me know down below. I think he should hold his place for the time being, and I think it might be worth the risk. You can see 2.1 touches in the box per 90 is very, very good. Better than some of the midfielders on this list. 0.12 expected assists. That puts his non-penalty expected goal involvement at 0.14. That's very, very good for a £4.3 million defender. And that puts his expected FPL points higher than both Veltman and Williams. So I think if you're going to take the risk, if you're happy taking the risk, I think a nice 5th, maybe even a 4th defender might be 8 Nuri. You could probably squeeze out, as we'll see in the draft section, 8 Nuri alongside Williams. And in doing so, have 2 really good budget enablers that have pretty good underlying statistics. But that is a big risk, having 2 very cheap defenders. Moving on to the midfielders, Douglas Luiz is someone that I think is pretty good if you're looking for someone that will play almost every minute and does have a little bit of goal threat. And in the goal threat, what I probably mean is expected assist creativity, because he does take a few free kicks and he does take a few corners as well. You can see his expected assists are 0.09, which is pretty decent for a £4.4 million holding midfielder. So if you're just looking for a 90-minute man, I don't mind Douglas Luiz. Now, again, he's not 1 billion% nailed, but he should play the majority of the minutes. And also, as you can see by the fixture difficulty rating at the end, he is first in the Premier League, or Aston Villa are first in the Premier League for fixture difficulty over the next sort of 6 to 10 game weeks. So I would be looking at Douglas Luiz if you want a very cheap midfielder that will play the majority of minutes and has decent underlying data. You've also got KDH there, Dewsbury Hall. So this is an interesting one because if he's playing, I really like him. He's got 2.06 touch in the box per 90, non-penalty expected goals per 90 of 0.07, and an expected assist of 0.18. That puts his non-pen expected goal involvement at 0.25, which is really, really good for a £4.4 million midfielder. So I suppose, obviously, when like Ndidi are back, when Leicester have their full team back, I'm not sure that he starts every game. I'm not even sure if he starts at all. That would be a question to pose to Leicester fans. But if you think he will start some minutes or start the majority of minutes, he probably looks like the best midfielder on this list. His underlying statistics are really, really strong. Outside that, we've got Moda of Brighton. Now, Moda's been playing OOP. He's been playing out of position. He's been playing up front at sometimes, just behind the strikers, out on the left as well. He's been playing almost as like a forward player, and he's only 4.5 million. He's got a similar issue to KDH, though, in the fact that I'm not entirely sure that when they've got their full team back, he'll play that many minutes. But for the time being, he looks fairly nailed in that Brighton team. And you can see that his underlying statistics are really strong as well, potentially even stronger than KDH. 3.82 expected FPL points per 90, 0.26 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 as well. So if you do want to take a risk, KDH and Moda are two really good options, but I'm just not sure how nailed their minutes are long term. What that leaves, therefore, is probably the obvious budget enabler in midfield. Of course, he is £4.6 million, and that's Jacob Ramsey. And I just think for everything that you get with him, he is probably the one to go for me. You can see his non-penalty expected goals is the highest out of all of the players on this list. His expected assist is the third highest, but that puts his non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 at 0.24. And also his expected FPL points per 90 at the highest on this list at 3.93. When you take into account the fact that he's looking better with every game that he plays. They've got the best fixtures in the league over the next 6 to 8 game weeks, Aston Villa. They've also got 2 really nice fixtures to be rearranged in Burnley and Leeds. I just think that everything points towards Jacob Ramsey for me being the best budget enabler in midfield, and he's probably worth the extra 0.2 million that you're paying over Douglas Luiz and KDH, and the extra 0.1 million you're paying over Moda. So I like all 4 of those midfielders for different reasons, but for me, it's got to be Jacob Ramsey. And then I've only got 2 strikers on the list because the budget strikers are pretty dire. I wouldn't quite class King and Dennis as budget. I just think they're starting to go towards that £6 million price tag, in which case they're probably going slightly towards more of like a mid-priced budget striker. So with Adam Eder, 4.9 million is a pretty good price, and his underlying statistics are really good. It's just a minutes thing again. They've got Sargent, they've got Pookie, they've got a few players that they can play in attack. I'm not sure that he plays 90 minutes in every game. I do think that he should be starting the majority of minutes at the moment because he's fantastic. But again, across the next 15 game weeks, if you're looking a little bit longer term with this pick, I don't know how nailed he is. And the issue with Eder is that there is no one around that price at 4.9, apart from potentially Broyer at 5.2. So if you do get stuck with him and he does have his minutes reduced, it's going to be quite difficult to jump off of him. But you can see touches in the box, 4.37 per 90. 0.26 non-penalty expected goals per 90. 5.25 expected FPL points per 90 puts him the best on this list. So there are worse options, and at 4.9 million, he's definitely worth the price tag, assuming he continues to play quite a few minutes. So again, if you're a Norwich fan, let me know down below. As far as I can see, at the moment, he should be nailed, but I just worry about that long term. And then probably the best striker on the list, again, as you would expect, really, looking at the underlying statistics, looking at expected minutes, is probably Broyer. He looks fairly nailed. He looks fantastic. Apparently, Southampton have just launched a £25 million bid to keep him there long term. If that does go through, you can imagine that they want to play him even more now because he's their player, and any development he makes will just add value to him for Southampton. He's got the highest touches in the box per 90. He's got the best expected goals per 90 on this list. He's got the best, second best expected FPL points per 90. And Southampton, if I just turn my chair, they have the second best fixtures over the next 6 game weeks from an FPL perspective, from an attacking perspective, I should say. So putting all of that together, this might be a fairly obvious point, but if I were to give you one defender, one midfielder, and one striker that I think are the best budget enablers on a wild card, it would be 8 Nuri, but he is a slight rotation risk, Ramsey from midfield, and then Broyer in attack. So if you're going for a budget enabler in each different section, I would go 8 Nuri, Ramsey, and Broyer. Let me know down below if there are any budget enablers that I've missed off. Of course, I've tried going as cheap as possible here, but I think all of these are pretty good options in their own right. It largely comes down to expected minutes and how many minutes you expect each of these players to play. So what I've decided to do is, as always, go above and beyond. Rather than just create a wildcard draft, I've created 4 different wildcard drafts. Now, yes, you should be slightly focusing on the personnel, and I have chosen the personnel specifically for different reasons, and I'll explain that. But what I think this far out from Game Week 24, what you should really be considering is what structure do you want for your team long term? Do you want to go for 3 premiums? Do you want to go big at the back? Do you want to stack your bench? Do you want rotating keepers? These are the decisions that you can start making now. And once you've decided on your sort of philosophy for the end of the season, your general chip strategy, and what you want your team to look like, generally speaking, then when we get closer and we get those double game week announcements and we start getting a better idea of the fixtures moving forward, then you can start really considering personnel, because anything could happen over the next 2 weeks. And with different arrangements, different players getting injured, whatever it may be, so much can happen. I just don't think it's necessarily worth stressing over completely the personnel. So for draft 1, I think this is probably the most balanced draft I can build, in my opinion. The only thing that's not balanced about this is that there is only 1 premium in this draft. So what I think is, outside of it only having 1 premium, so making it quite difficult to get the likes of De Bruyne, Fernandes, Ronaldo, Kane, Lukaku, whoever it may be, outside of that, I think you can get to most players pretty easily, and I think you have general flexibility moving forward. So I think that if you are to play a back 4 for the rest of the season, I think the optimal back 4 would be a double up of City players, probably Cancelo and Laporte, and then probably Trent and Luka Dean. So I think in most of my back 4 drafts, in most of my wildcard drafts, those are the 4 defenders that I want to play most weeks. If you want to play a back 3 and you want to go for a slightly cheaper defender, of course you can drop probably Laporte, and I would have a back 3 of Cancelo, Trent, and Luka Dean. I think in almost every draft, probably in every draft I'm including here, I've got a back 3 at least of Cancelo, Trent, and Luka Dean, and then it's outside of that, do I want to go for a 4th defender? So I think that those 3 are pretty much locked in most of my teams, and then Laporte, you can see here, is my 4th defender. I've actually gone pretty big at the back here in this first balanced draft, because I've got Cucurella as the 5th defender. The reason I've got Cucurella in there is Brighton are fantastic. They've probably got a double game week in Game Week 25. Again, that might have been announced by the time you're watching this. And therefore, I like having him in. But what I also like about Cucurella is that he is that sort of cash cow, that flexible defender that I can either move to another defender, or I can downgrade to like a Williams or an 8 Nuri, and in doing so, I can find myself some money. So I like having a 5th defender in there for that reason. And if I don't want to, I just think Cucurella is a fantastic option anyway. So I think that is the optimal back 4. And then the 5th defender, it's up to you really, whether you want to go super cheap with like a Dalot, 8 Nuri, Williams, or if you want around a 5.1, 5.2 million pound defender. You can see the 2 keepers that I've chosen in this draft are Sarr and Pope. As I said, if you downgrade those to Sanchez and Ramsdale, you give yourself some extra money to work with. Outside of that, I've chosen arguably the 4 players that I think represent the best value moving forward in the midfield. That is Jota, Bowen, Foden, and Salah. I think for me, that is probably the optimal midfield 4. Yes, it would be fantastic to own De Bruyne, Son, Fernandes, but when I look at value, I personally think that Jota and Foden offer better value than Bruno Fernandes, Mane, KDB, whoever it may be in midfield, Son. I just think that Jota and Foden at around £8 million offer such great value. If they continue to play, which they should, even with all the players coming back, I think they offer great value. So if we're looking at value for money as well as potential points, I think arguably that's the best midfield 4. And I would be including Salah on my wildcard. Now, at the time of recording this, Egypt are playing the Ivory Coast. Therefore, I do not know if Salah is back for Game Week 24. I've got Salah in all 4 drafts here, but assuming somehow Egypt do beat the Ivory Coast and Salah's not back for Game Week 24, or potentially he's just not back anyway, you can just replace Salah for De Bruyne, Fernandes, whoever you want in that midfield spot. I would still go for a premium midfielder. I wouldn't spread the funds to Ronaldo and Kane. I would keep a premium midfielder spot at the very least, because you are going to want Salah back in. Burnley in 25, Norwich in 26. You're going to want him back in your team. So in my opinion, if he's not back for 24, although I think he should be, you still go for a premium midfielder. You can just straight away, like I said, replace him for maybe Fernandes, because they probably have that double game week in Game Week 25 against Brighton. So with respect to the front 3, the reason I like this front 3 so much is that I really do like having 2 mid-priced strikers. Now, I know earlier on in the season, and even in recent weeks, the mid-priced strikers just haven't been fantastic value. Antonio, Watkins, and Calvert-Lewin have all been really disappointing. Outside of that, there aren't that many options. But just because in the past someone hasn't been valuable, or a specific price point hasn't been, doesn't mean that they can't be in the future. And I just think over the future weeks, Watkins and Calvert-Lewin will provide really good value. And if neither of them do, you can downgrade them to like a King or a Dennis, or potentially all the way to like an Adam Eder, or you can just switch to like an Antonio or a Chris Wood. You can do so many things there, or potentially get up to Kane or to anyone in attack that you might want, Ronaldo, etc., by downgrading elsewhere. So I like having 2 mid-price strikers. I think that offers you a lot of flexibility, because you can keep the one that's performing well, and then rotate the second one out for potential double game weeks as well. And then the third striker, as we've said quite a few times in this video, Broja offers fantastic value. And I should have also said Ramsey offers fantastic value as well. So I think you've got a really strong 11 here. You've got a strong bench and you've got nice rotations as well. And I think you've got a lot of really good price points, which offer you brilliant flexibility moving forward. The only real issue, as I've said, is that you only have one premium, and this structure doesn't allow you to easily move to a second. You can get there in 2 transfers, and the most easy 2 transfers to do. If you want a premium striker, you would probably have to downgrade Foden or Jota and then upgrade Calvert-Lewin. And if you want a premium midfielder, you would downgrade Calvert-Lewin or Watkins, and then you would bring in a De Bruyne or a Fernandes for Foden or Jota. So you could probably get there in 2 moves, maybe 3 moves, but it's definitely not easy. And therefore, that's the one limitation with this, is that it really is structured around only having 1 premium. Therefore, let's now take a look at a 2 premium draft and what sacrifices you need to make to get 2 premiums into your team. Right, so this is the 2 premium draft. It is largely very similar, but to get in the second premium, of course, we've had to make some downgrades. So let me just, rather than going through each of the players again, just compare the differences between the 2. So the first difference is we've gone from Pope and Sarr to Ramsdale and Sanchez. Again, I really like this double up. The fixtures are really good. And of course, it is cheaper. I obviously bought Ramsdale at 4.5 million, I believe. So I've got him quite a bit cheaper. And Sanchez is only 4.6. So if you already own Ramsdale, or you just want to bring in Sanchez, it is a lot cheaper than the Pope-Sarr combination. Outside of that, the big difference is I had to downgrade Laporte and Cucurella to 8 Nuri and Williams. So we've had to take out 2 very good sort of 5.5 million-ish 2 defenders and bring in 2 very cheap budget enablers. But as we said in the previous section, they're pretty good players to bring in. So I've brought in 8 Nuri and Williams as my 4th and 5th defender. And then what I've had to do is basically do Calvert-Lewin to Kane. Now, again, don't focus on the personnel. I'm not necessarily saying that Kane is the best second premium player to have. But what I've just shown you here is how you would end up having to get a second premium in, the sort of downgrades that I would end up making. Because I think I would still probably want Salah, Foden, Bowen and Jota. I would still want the back 3 of Cancelo, Trent and Luke Dean. I would still probably want 1 mid-price striker in Watkins. So really, again, it would be downgrading both keepers and then downgrading a couple of your defenders as well. And then that would allow you to bring in Kane for Calvert-Lewin. I do think if I were to have a 2 premium draft, it would probably be Salah and Kane. I think with the 3 fixtures, they've got to be rearranged. Kane's starting to look back to his best. He's showing glimpses. I think Kane could be a really nice differential moving forward. If you didn't want to have Kane, I do think Bruno Fernandes could be a decent shout. I do really like De Bruyne, but I just think with the potential double game week in 25 for Bruno Fernandes, he could be a fantastic option. And I do think that Ronaldo will start to struggle. He does look like he's struggling at the moment. Bruno could potentially come back onto penalties. And we know Bruno is a confidence-based player, and he does start to look back to his best in a similar way to Kane. So I guess I would probably go for Kane, but I don't mind Bruno. I don't mind KDB either. The point of this isn't to specifically show you how to get Kane. It's more so just to show you how I would get a second premium in. So I guess the only issue with this, it's not necessarily an issue, is that each week you would need to play one of Ramsey, Broja, 8 Nuri or Williams. Again, that's not a major issue because all 4 of them, as we saw in the budget enabler section, I think all 4 of those offer excellent value. I'm not necessarily sure I would want to start one of those each week. I think each of those provide really good bench options. But again, Broja with nice fixtures is a great option. Ramsey's not bad against Leeds this week. I wouldn't mind playing 8 Nuri in a good fixture from a defensive perspective. So it's not the end of the world, but those are the sacrifices that you need to make to fit in 2 premiums into a wildcard draft. So I've called this the 8-5 team, and I'm not talking about working hours here. I'm talking about the concept that you could have 8 players that you play no matter what, and then you have 5 players that you rotate where you always have to start 2 and you bench 3 of them. So what you're essentially getting at here is to have, rather than have a really strong 11 or a strong 15, you have an incredibly strong 8, and then the 5 players outside of that are all pretty budget enablers, and you just make sure that 2 of them can rotate in each week. And I like this because what you're doing is you're really putting a lot of money into your starting 11. And what it enables you to do is almost get 2.5 premiums. I wouldn't quite call it 3 premiums. I'll call it 2.5. Because what you can do here, the 3 that I've chosen randomly for this, is just to prove the sort of point of concept, is to have Salah, De Bruyne and Son. I would argue that Son's sort of a half premium. He's not quite at that sort of Fernandes, De Bruyne, Kane, Salah sort of level. But he is still quite expensive at around 10.6. So the 8 players that you would play pretty much every single week are Laporte, Cancelo, Trent and Dean. Again, that back 4. Midfield 4 of Son, Bowen, De Bruyne and Salah, which just looks so good. And then you would need to play 2 each week of Edouard, Broja, Adam Eder, Ramsey and 8 Nuri. And they're all really good options. We've spoken about Broja, Ida, Ramsey, and Aitnuri already. Edouard's got really decent underlying statistics for his price, got pretty good fixtures over the next 4, can take penalties as well. So I really like him as an option. I think he's a pretty good sort of mid-priced budget enabler at around 6.4 million. I quite like this structure. The only issue I have is that the bench isn't ideal, and I'm not necessarily sure that I would want a bench boost with, I was going to say a weak bench, but I'm not necessarily sure this is an ideal bench boost team. I think I would want a slightly stronger bench if possible, and I'm not sure I'm desperately a fan of starting 2 budget enablers each week, but I do still really, really like the team, and what I do like is that you're able to get such a strong midfield and defence, and the team just looks really good in general. So let me know down below. I've got a feeling this will be quite a popular one, the 8-5 draft, but I guess I just wanted to show you, again, proof of concept that you can get a really, really strong core of sort of 8 or 9 players and just rotate those extra 2 spots in your team. I really like it. Let's move on to the 4th and final draft. So this is definitely a different draft, a different kind of draft, I should say. And this draft I've just called flexibility. And the point of this draft is to allow you to perfectly attack blanks and doubles in the future by not shoehorning yourself into a specific structure. So again, the only issue with this draft is you've only got 1 premium. So the only inflexible thing about it is that you can't realistically get to another premium in 1 move, but you can definitely get there in 2 moves. So I don't see that as a major issue. What I've essentially got here is I've basically got a player at every single price point. Now, in doing that, what you can do is in most cases, you can move to any player you want in 1 transfer, or you can at least attack a lot of different players with different transfers. For example, the issue I find with drafts 1 to 3 is that you've just got such a strong team. You've got Laporte, Cancelo, Trent, Dean. You've got Jota, Foden, Bowen, and Salah. You've then got Calvert-Lewin and Watkins up top. You don't really want to ever transfer any of those players out. So when we get really tasty doubles, say Burnley get a double game week, how are you going to get Cornet in? Say Palace get suddenly an amazing double game week, how are you going to get Edouard and Gallagher in? Again, say Villa have a fantastic double game week. Do you want Coutinho? If so, how are you going to get him in? So the issue when you have such an incredibly strong core of 11 players that you want to play most weeks is that when you then want to attack double game weeks and bring players in, it's very difficult to do so because most of your players, you feel like you want to keep them long term. So what you do here is almost the opposite. Of course, the back 4 is really nice. I've chucked Robertson in here just as another player that is definitely worth considering. So the back 4 is fairly solid. But outside of that, and maybe Salah, maybe Foden and Bowen as well. But what you've got is you've got Gallagher, who's a really nice price point that you can move to most players. So you could go for a Damari Gray with Gallagher. You could go to a Cornet. You could go down to a Ramsey if you want. So that Gallagher spot is almost like a cash cow ready to move elsewhere. You've got Edouard and Watkins and King at 3 different price points. Do you want to move to a Broja if they have a double game week 25? Do you want to move from Edouard to pay maybe like a King or a Dennis if you don't already have King? Move from a Watkins to a Calvert-Lewin. So you've got 3 different price points to move around there. Then on the bench, again, you've got Martinelli. You can move straight to a Smith, to a Damari Gray. You could, again, move down to a Ramsey. You could move up to a Cornet. You've got Dalot on your bench at 4.5 million that you can move to another cheap player. So what I like about this team is that there are a lot of different price points. And the final thing to note, you might have noticed already, is that this has £2.3 million in the bank when I created this. So not only do you have loads of flexible price points, but you also have some money in the bank. So not only are you okay already with the price points, but if you're not and you do need to make an upgrade, potentially you need to get from a Gallagher to a Jota or from a Gallagher to someone else in and around that sort of 7.5, maybe like I said, a Coutinho, or potentially you want to go for a Rafinha, you've got money in the bank to do so. So I suppose what the point of this is, do consider price points and consider the fact that if you have an incredibly strong 11, you're going to find it difficult to really, really target and get aggressive with the double game weeks because you're not going to want to sell your players. And finally, don't be afraid to leave money in the bank. Leaving 2.2 million in the bank, or 2.3 million in the bank, I should say, does not make this a bad draft. Not by any means. You've still got a great 11. You've still got a strong bench, 2 rotating keepers, but you also allow yourself that flexibility if you do want to bring another player. You could even potentially go from like a Foden to a Son if you have a little bit more money in the bank. So I really like this. I think it's super flexible. I think it's another way to attack a wild card. I probably think, all things considered, I really like the balanced draft. The only issue I find with the balanced draft, i.e. draft 1, is that I do like having a second premium because I do think that that makes you pretty flexible. So I think I just about prefer draft 1, but I do like having the second premium. So therefore 2 and 3 also appeal to me. And then draft 4, I guess, is more of a creative approach to a wild card, but I definitely don't dislike it. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 24 complete wildcard guide. Of course, I hope you found it useful, even if you aren't wildcarding. Do let me know if you're wildcarding down below. Feel free to type out your team and I'll take a quick look at it. Of course, when we're this far away from Game Week 24, anything can happen. I think the double game week is going to be announced midway through me processing and editing this video. But what I've done is I've pretty much covered that anyway. We know we might get a double in 25. We know we might get a double in 26. But around that, the general advice stays the same. Be flexible with your team. Make sure you've got a strong bench. Make sure you're including players with teams with fixtures to be rearranged. It all stays fairly similar. And the budget enablers section wouldn't change too much either. So hopefully this video is useful no matter what happens between me finishing recording, it going live, and then you watching it as well. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel, as I said, please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Completely free for you to do, but it helps to support the channel so much. We've still got a lot of content planned for this little 2-week mini winter break that we've got. We've got Psychology 101 videos. We'll probably have a Q&A video when I do hit 10,000 subscribers, and we'll also have some like transfer videos, team selection videos, whatever it may be. There's so much content still to go. We'll try and live stream a little bit as well. So if you are enjoying all of that, do make sure you subscribe. But until next time, guys, thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.